Thank you, Doris, for inviting me to Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors. It's, on one level, perhaps incongruous to be speaking about the Arab-Israeli conflict and what happened in the Holocaust. On the other hand, I hope to elucidate for you the connection between the Holocaust and the massacres in Israel today, the so-called intifadas. In Yiddish, the word intifada is pogrom. We use the Arabic word because they have infused modern language with their vocabulary, and they've done it in such a way as to completely screw up the mind. I gave you a handout. It's the cover of my book. This is the book. It's an epic. It's not a trilogy. It's one long book. It's a chronicle of the invention of the Palestinians as the obstacle to peace, because that's what the object of the invention was. It's available only on Amazon. You have to buy it online, and then it's mailed to you, or online you can get the Kindle version, which is much cheaper and instantaneous. What you have in your hands are pieces of the book. What I gave you is the cover, and if you look on the next page right now, you'll see a map which does not appear in the book, but it's important because if you look at that map, this is the second page only, Adele, second page only. Right, that map is from the 1969 Rand McNally Atlas. This is 2 years after the Six-Day War. You will search that map all night, forever, and never find the words West Bank. What you will find, if you look where it says Nablus, you'll find just above it or below it, in English, S-H-O-M-R-O-N, Shomron, which is the transliteration of Samaria. Above it, it says Samaria in letters. It's the same name. Samaria is the Latin corruption of Shomron. If you look lower down, below Jerusalem, you will see J-U-D-A-E-A in large block letters, which spreads across the area. And those were the names used to describe this real estate for thousands of years. This is 1969, 2 years after the war. What you have here from Rand McNally is cross-hatching, and further down outside this picture, at the bottom of the page, it says these are areas taken by the Israeli army in the 1967 war. Still, at that point, 1969, the term West Bank was not in use. What my book shows is how this term came to be used. It was invented basically in 1968. My book documents practically day by day this technique that's called semantic infiltration. You come up with words, and you get them into the vocabulary, and then you change reality. George Orwell understood this. This was his message in his famous essay called Politics in the English Language, and then he wrote 1984, in which language is perverted and used to change reality. We also know this from the Torah. In the opening verses of the Torah, God creates the world how? Vayomer. Vayomer ye'o. And God said, let there be light. And God said, let there be a firmament. Vayomer, vayomer, vayomer. Our reality is made up of words. And what the Arabs, and not only Arabs, but anti-Jew non-Arabs, have done is to create a whole lexicon of words, each one of which is meant to stick it to the Jews. You asked, where did I come up with the name Deprogram Program? I began doing this program for Arutz Sheva, IsraelNationalNews.com 12 years ago. And I called it that because the focus of my analysis of the day's news is the vocabulary used to describe our reality in Israel. And it is one perversion of the truth after another, to the point where people aren't even aware of it. The first word to understand, which is totally tendentious and purely anti-Semitic, is the word Palestinian. Palestinian is an anti-Semitic term. Every time you use it, every time you hear it, you're listening to anti-Semitism. Why? Because when you talk about the Palestinians today, who are you talking about? Oh, it's this people that lived in Palestine for thousands of years, and they are Various groups. They're mostly Arab. Most of them are Muslim Arabs. Some of them are Christian Arabs. Some would include the Druze, who are Arabic speakers but don't identify with the Arabs. There are the Bedouin. That's another subgroup. Some might include the Circassians, or Muslims who came into Eretz Yisrael in the mid-19th century. So you have these various groups of people in Palestine who are today's Palestinians. There's one group, though, in Palestine which is excluded: the Jews. When you talk about the Palestinians, you're not talking about Jews, are you? And so the Jews can't possibly have any purchase on Palestine because they're not Palestinians. The ear, the brain computes, right? France belongs to the French, and Turkey to the Turks, and China to the Chinese, and Russia to the Russians, and Palestine to the Palestinians. And so the Jews aren't Palestinians. What are they doing there? What they're doing there is stealing Palestine from the Palestinians, who have been there since the sixth day of creation. This is the Palestinian narrative that we live with to this very day. Yeah, please. Okay. 1 second. I'm jet lagged, have a slight cold, with your permission. The invention of this phantom nation, which is the title of my book, is truly a phantom because there's nobody here, there's nobody on the planet who can put together 2 or 3 sentences with facts about their culture, their history, their cuisine. Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Paris, London. We have all these different restaurants, all these different peoples. In New York, where I'm originally from, we have Armenian restaurants, Bulgarian restaurants, Cuban restaurants, Chinese restaurants, Cuban Chinese restaurants. French restaurants, you have Northern Italian cooking, Southern Italian cooking. Nobody has ever eaten in a Palestinian restaurant. There is no such thing as Palestinian cuisine. There's no such thing as a Palestinian language. These people speak a foreign language. They speak Arabic. The technical term is the provenance of a language of France, of French is France. That's its home base. The provenance of the Palestinians' language is Arabia. They call themselves Arabs. They speak Arabic, and they come from the Arabian Peninsula. What could be so difficult to understand? Instead, we have this myth that this is the ancient Palestinian people who were minding their own business until after World War II. This is what Barack Obama was hinting at in his speech in Cairo in 2009. The Palestinians were minding their own business, and then after World War II, the guilty Europeans, feeling guilty for what they did to the Jews, said to the Jews, why don't you go steal Palestine from the Palestinians to compensate yourselves? So the Jews just barged in after World War II and threw them out, moved into their homes, stole their orchards, stole their fields, and there's not a word of truth in any of this. And that's why Palestinian nationalism is this generation's anti-Semitism. This is what's become of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism itself is a dishonest word when it was invented and still should never be used, but we have to deal with the reality. The word anti-Semitism first appears in the mid-19th century. And why does it appear? Because the Christians in Europe had lost their faith in Christianity. The American Revolution was made by non-Christians. The first 5 presidents of American history, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Monroe, Madison, these were not Christians. They called themselves deists. A deist was basically Isaac Newton's notion of a concept of a God who creates the world and then disappears. He's not involved, he's not a providential God, he's not involved in the world anymore. That's what they believed in. Like Aristotle, they couldn't get beyond the notion of there had to be some creator. The world was created by a God, but he's not the God of the Jews, and he's not the God of the Christians. They said there is no Messiah, Jesus was not the Messiah, the Jews are waiting for the Messiah, the Jews are wrong too. That was the deist thinking. And it became the fashion to overthrow Christianity in Europe. Then you wind up, a generation later, with people who have to now live with emancipated Jews who become citizens after the Napoleonic revolutions. Napoleon conquered Europe, and everywhere he freed the Jews. He gave them their citizenship in his empire. His deal was, though, you have to denationalize. I will make you citizens of my empire like you've never been citizens anywhere on the planet. Jews didn't have citizenship anywhere in the beginning of the 19th century. Only you're going to have to see yourselves as Frenchmen of the Jewish persuasion. You're no longer a nation. You, as French citizens, will look upon the Jews in Germany as not your mishpucha. This is another nation. They may have a similar philosophy like you, a Jewish philosophy, but they're not your family. Your family is in France. The Jews are emancipated, but that was a decision made by the most sophisticated, enlightened, that's where the word comes from, the Age of Enlightenment, people who had rejected Christianity. He emancipated the Jews. But the average guy and the less average guy wasn't happy with that. The Jews were rejected after the emancipation. You had in Germany in 1819 the Hep riots, where Jews wanted to study in the university, and they could now because they were citizens. But there were riots in the universities in Germany against them. We don't want to sit in classrooms next to Jews. It was that bad. There was something about the Jews that people didn't want to deal with. So the emancipation leads up to a situation in which people are still hating the Jews after they've given up on Christianity, because when they gave up on Christianity, you no longer had a reason to hate the Jews. They're no longer deicides. Until 1965, the Roman Catholic Church preached that every Jew was a murderer. Every Jew was guilty of killing Jesus, murdering Jesus. Only in 1965 did they change the doctrine, under the great Pope, Pope John XXIII. At the Vatican II conclave, as it was called, and he issued a papal bull called Nostra Aetate, and the doctrine, after almost 2,000 years, becomes this. Yes, the Jews at the time of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth were responsible, but it stops there. Until 1965, there was a genetic evil that every Jew was born with, and now this ends. In the mid-19th century, when they had given up their faith, the Europeans, they still were uncomfortable with the Jews, so they need a new reason to hate them. And they come up with the notion of, it's not because they're a religion, we don't care about stuff anymore. I don't care what they believe. They are Semites. That's their problem. They are Asiatics. And we have a biological, racial discomfort in their presence. And we can never integrate with them and accept them into our community. Anti-Semitism, in its earliest days, was not about murdering Jews. There were many Jewish anti-Semites. What was the Jewish anti-Semite up to? The same thing as the Gentile anti-Semite. We don't want to kill anybody. We just want the Jews to give up their silly beliefs in the God of Israel, being a chosen people, having a kosher law, keeping themselves apart. Become a normal people. Get rid of this stuff, and then you'll be accepted. Anti-Semitism became the legal way then of being standoffish with the Jews, not wanting them in part of your life and in your community and next door. But it was dishonest, because there are no Semites. There never were any Semites. They took the word from the study of languages. By the late 18th century, you have the academic study of languages, and it was decided there are language groups like the Romance languages, French, Latin, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, and there are other groups. And so there was the Semitic group. Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Ugaritic, Akkadian, a whole bunch of languages which are grouped together and called the Semitic language group, which originally was called the Shemitic language group, because it comes from the person of Shem, who was one of the three sons of Noah. And over the years, a reason, I don't know the why, but it happened, the H fell away. And instead of saying Shemitic, people said Semitic. But that's the origin of the term. It goes back to Shem, who was one of the three sons of Noah. Which brings me back to the so-called Palestinians. They claim to be Semites. They're not Semites. They're Hamites. And when you understand who the character of Ham is, you will understand the Arabs. Of the three sons, Shem, Yafet, and Ham, Yafet, which means beautiful, is the father of Western civilization as we know it, the art, the music, particularly the plastic arts, painting, sculpture. Jews, as anti-idolaters, are forbidden to get into that stuff, so we become great musicians, but not great sculptors and painters as a rule. That's the Shemitic line. And then there's the Hamitic line, rather. The line of Yafet. Shem is the direct forebear of Abraham. And we come from Abraham, and the Arabs do not. Yes, Abraham was the father of Ishmael, but not his mother. His mother was a princess of Egypt, and Egypt was one of the four sons of Ham. Not only that, we learn this from the Torah, right in the book of Genesis. She makes a shidduch, she marries him off to another Mitzriya, another Egyptian woman. So this is a man whose mother is not a Semite, whose wife is not a Semite, and we go by the modern classical Judaism. His children are not Semites, they're Hamites. And when you get into the character of Ham, you'll see the connection. Ham was Noah's problem child, big time. I don't want to go down that path right now, but this is part of the lie. Just 2 weeks ago, I was at the Western Wall, and I'm overhearing an Arab tour guide. And he's saying to his charges, there's not one shred of evidence that there was any Jewish temple on this mount. This has become the truth, in quotes. The Arabs are a people who make up history in the present. They rewrite it for their own purposes. History is what you want it to be in order to get something in the present. And that's what they've done with the invention of the Palestinians, is the obstacle to peace, because until the 1960s, there were no Palestinians talked about. If you read my prologue, that's what I discovered. I remember it too. We didn't talk about Palestinians in the 1960s. I first went to Israel in 1965. There were no Palestinians. Nobody used the term. It doesn't appear in any of the papers. It was invented in 1959 by Gamal Abdel Nasser, and it becomes the lever which launches the notion of a nation of Palestinians who were in place for thousands of years, who were kicked out of their homes by the Jews. Of course, there's not a shred of evidence that this happened. We know from the UN records that there were 590,000 Arabs who were registered as refugees in 1949. We also know that about 100,000 of them had left in the 6 months between the declaration, or rather the recommendation of the General Assembly in 1947 on November 29th, and 6 months later Israel's Declaration of Independence, May 14th. 100,000 of these people left under their own accord. Nobody chased them out. And where did they go? They went back home, because most of them had come from Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, all over the Arab world. And the best and the brightest of them went back to where their families were. And so they didn't become refugees, they didn't go into refugee camps, they were received by their cousins and brothers and sisters, where they had left and come into Palestine during the mandatory period to make money. One of these families was the Said family. Edward Said was one of the great propagandists for the Arab cause, for the Palestinian cause. I knew him personally. I deal with him in the book. I have pages on this man. I was a student of his before the Six-Day War. Before the Six-Day War, Edward Said told us, his students, he was a Lebanese Christian who grew up in Cairo, which was the truth. After the Six-Day War, he becomes this ancient Palestinian family that had been living in Jerusalem since the beginning of time, who were driven from their homes, and he's one of these refugees. There's not a shred of truth to this. But this is Arab truth. The Arabs have a truth which is subjective and not objective. It's a different culture. It's what the problems that we have and why there's no peace, because they are operating on a very different level of intellection. For them, truth is subjective and not objective. What do I mean by that? When it's subjective, it's inside my feelings, or my subjective truth. After the 48 war, they had lost. They felt bad. They were humiliated. Some of them lost their homes. About 30,000 were driven from their homes by Yitzhak Rabin, of all people, out of 590,000. And that's the truth. And since it's not right to make people feel bad, and it's not right to humiliate people like this, then you come up with a story to explain how it happened, and to remove from yourself any responsibility for it, and to cast all the blame on the other person. This is how the Arab mind works. What I do in my book is I try to show how, from basically the creation of the League of Nations in 1919 following World War I, for the next 40 years, until the 1960s, the Arab position is there is no Palestine. Palestine did not exist for 14 centuries under Muslim rule. They didn't call it Palestine as they do today. They called it Bilad Asham in Arabic, which means Damascus territory. In 1919, the League of Nations decided to create a Palestine which had not existed in 2,000 years. If you look in the handouts, you will see, I don't know, about page 6 or 7, a skimpy little map which is under the Turks. It's what Palestine looked like before World War I. No, keep going. No, not that. Keep going. There you go. No, that's the Encyclopedia Britannica. If I may, hand that up to show to everybody. This is Palestine under the Turks. The Turks ruled for 400 years. And if you look carefully, you'll see no Palestine written on it. What you'll see is vilayet, which means province in Arabic and Turkish. And you'll see Sanjak, which is like a district, administrative district. This was Eretz Yisrael for 400 years under the Turks. And when in 1919, the League of Nations decided to create a Palestine as a Jewish homeland in black and white, the Arabs say, there is no Palestine. The leader of the Arabs at the time, Haj Amin al-Husseini, establishes a newspaper in Jerusalem in October of 1919, and he calls it Al-Surya Junabiya in Arabic, which means southern Syria. This is southern Syria. This is not Palestine. Our capital is Damascus. We want all of this whole area that you call Palestine to be annexed by the new state of Syria, which is really a truncated version of historic Syria to the Arabs. This was his position until the 1960s. This was the position at the UN in 1947. They had people testifying throughout this entire period, saying there is no Palestine. What are you making Palestine into this place just for Jews? The Jews in the Quran are required to be humiliated and oppressed. This is the language. And that's how Jews lived under the Arabs from the beginning of the religion. You've heard the story, the secular left-wing Zionists who created Israel have this notion that anti-Semitism, because it originated the term in Europe, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Europeans, of the Christian culture and the post-Christian culture. But our Semitic brothers, calling them fellow Semites, didn't have a deicide charge. The Muslims didn't claim the Jews had murdered God, which was the language from the Roman Catholic Church. So, therefore, there's no anti-Semitism, there was no Holocaust. These are our Semitic brothers, and we'll be able to live with them by reestablishing our ancient homeland. It'll be just fine. There's not a shred of truth to this. When you read the history of the Jewish people in Muslim lands, and there's plenty of literature out there, you will see that the Jews suffered exactly as in Europe. In identical ways, no. There was no Holocaust because, first of all, you didn't have the concentrations. Most Jews lived in Europe. In 1948, there were only 1 million Jews living in all of the Arab countries, as opposed to pre-World War II, there were, 18 million Jews in Europe? And they're spread out over an expanse that's wider than the United States of America. The distance from LA to New York is shorter than from Casablanca to Baghdad. They occupy territory to this day which is larger than the United States by about 40%. They have 21 states there. And they're saying, we don't have enough. We have to have a 22nd state. In 1948, there were 6 independent Arab states, and early 1948, no Jewish state. In May, the Jews declared independence. And then you have the Jews fighting for their existence ever since. So now you have 6 Arab states and 1 Jewish state. Today there are 21 Arab states, and still not enough. They have to have the land that the Jews occupy in Judea and Samaria. Now, what I have shown here in these maps, if you go to the second to last page, this is one of the maps of Palestine. I have maybe half a dozen. The second to last page in black and white. Yeah, this is what Palestine was for thousands of years in the minds of people who thought about it. Palestine was a synonym for the Holy Land. And this is the border. On the north, on the south, on the east, and the west. If you notice on the top, you have Sidon, which is in today's Lebanon. Down the bottom it goes to Gaza. Over across the Jordan River, east of the Jordan River is not a boundary. This is Eretz HaKodesh. This is the dimensions of the Holy Land found in our Bible. There are word maps. There are descriptions of the Holy Land, north, east, south, and west, in several places in the Bible. And this is what it is again and again. You'll find further, closer to the front, the map of the Encyclopedia Britannica of 1911. Maybe about page, there you go, that's it. Encyclopedia Britannica. In 1911, the devotees of encyclopedias say this is the best encyclopedia ever. And there's an article on Palestine, and this is the map that goes with it. And it's 98% sure that Balfour himself looked at this very map that you're looking at now. This was the way people conceived of Palestine, and it's the same as the one I showed you before. It's more detailed, and of course we're reproducing it from a photocopy from a book that came out in 1911. And again, Sidon, Beirut in the top, down to Gaza on the west side, just below the Dead Sea on the east side, and of course it's about 35 miles east of the Jordan River. That is Palestine. If you go back now to that penultimate map, it's more or less the same. It's simpler, it's clearer. Not the last map. There you go. That's it. This map is more or less the same, and in my book I have about a half a dozen of these, from Sweden in 1907, Barcelona in 1911. This is how people thought of Palestine at the time of the First World War. And it is basically the biblical dimensions. Now if you flip to the last page of them all, you will see the identical map. However, it now has color and names. I commissioned a cartographer to use this same map and to add the colors, add the lines, and add the state names. Blue is the land we Jews control. Green is the land the Arabs control. What you're looking at is Palestine today. They talk about a two-state solution. There are 4 states at this very moment with a piece of Palestine. 3 of them are Arab and Judenrein. No Jews allowed. This green is 53% of this map. If these Arabs want another state, the 5-state solution, not the 2-state solution, they got it. Just got to convince the powers that be in Beirut, Damascus, and Amman to hand it over. They are as much occupiers of Palestine as Israel. But the language, the lexicon is that we are now in occupation of ancient Palestine and only us. Elsewhere in this handout, you'll find the PLO map. The PLO map is Israel up to 1967 plus Judea and Samaria, the Golan, and the Gaza Strip. It's a straight edge on the eastern side. Right, you got it.
The logo, is that the PLO logo?
I'm sorry?
That's the one with the PLO logo on it?
Yes, the PLO logo.
Oh, it's not the PLO logo?
Yes, that's the PLO logo. Look at, that's their description of Palestine. Every year, the head of the PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, goes to the UN in the fall and demands 22% of Palestine. That's all I want, meaning Judea and Samaria. That's all I want. Give me just 22%, because for him, this is the map of Palestine. It's wrong. He has, as an Arab, 53% of Palestine right now. But these people are so illiterate about the history of Palestine, they don't even know it. I put this map on the back of my book here. It's the same map that you got there. That's the first chapter. First chapter shows you that these people are so unlettered in the history of the Palestine they claim to love for thousands of years, they don't even know what it looks like. I also show that when they wrote the PLO Covenant in 1964, they say the map of Palestine is as it was decided by the British and French at the peace conference in 1920. Excuse me? You're letting these British and French imperialists write the map of Palestine for you? Yes, that's what the Covenant says. The Covenant says, we don't know what it looks like. These Brits and these French people are telling us what it looks like, and that's the Palestine we want, which means all of Jordan. People today, right-wingers, say they got 77% of Palestine. This is not true. They got 53%, but it's spread out these 4 states. What people have in mind is the map of Jordan, which is great bulge to the east towards Iraq. That's not Palestine. This is Palestine. The map that I'm giving you here. all the maps here. This is the first chapter in my book in which we make clear that Palestine is something these people have no clue to. And then the rest of the book shows you how this concept was invented. When was it invented? In 1959, when they're still saying there is no Palestine, there's a switch. And the switch begins as a result of what's going on in Algeria. It's one of the longest chapters in the book, because what happened in Algeria between 1954 and 1962 became the model for the Palestinian cause. And what was that all about? The French invaded the city of Algiers in the year 1830. This invasion by the French of the city-state of Algiers was probably unique, I would say it is unique, in the history of Western imperialism and Western colonialism. Why? Because what the Western powers did over 400 years, the Spanish, the French, the English, the Dutch, Portuguese, went all around the world, moving into territories where the people had never given them any trouble, never been hostile, and they move in, colonize, they take the natural resources out, ship them back to the home country. That's colonialism, that's imperialism. The invasion of Algiers in 1830 by the French was another thing altogether. This was a justifiable self-defense, because for 1,000 years, the Muslims in Algiers had been what were called the Barbary pirates. They were not pirates. They were just Muslims who called themselves Mujahideen. They were called pirates because they attacked only civilian shipping, freighters, fishermen. They would come ashore on the beaches of southern Europe and kidnap people and enslave them and then sell them back for ransom. Man of La Mancha. Who's ever saw that Broadway show, Man of La Mancha? That takes place in a dungeon in Algiers because Cervantes, who wrote the book, Don Quixote, served 5 years as a slave in Algiers. He knew what he was talking about. The whole center section of the Spanish classic Don Quixote is about Cervantes spending 5 years as a slave in the city of Algiers. It was Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli in Libya, and Morocco who were called the Barbary pirates, but they weren't pirates. They were the official fleets of these Muslim powers, and their ships were these little cruisers, and they would attack only non-military Christian ships because they couldn't compete with the navies of the West, the Great British Navy, the Spanish Armada. They didn't have anything like that. And their interest was to attack infidels. And they had the right to do it because they have the true religion. And they're still fighting that jihad to this day. The Arabs in Jerusalem and elsewhere in Judea and Samaria, fighting Israel, watched what happened in Algeria when the locals finally rebelled and began attacking the French, who had been there since 1830, blowing them up, just like an intifada in Israel. Bombs in cafes, murdering people on the roads, you name it. Intifada. And this went on for 8 years, and in the end, the French left, and Algeria went free. Algeria was also invented by the French. Before the French invasion, there was no Algeria. It was just the city of Algiers. And the French created these boundaries of this very large state with its oil reserves. What happened there is that the locals learned to speak the language of the Europeans. They learned to talk about wars of national liberation, freedom fighters, in French. The best of them spoke fluent French. And they were appealing to men like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir and Albert Camus and all of these French intellectuals. And they told them we're anti-capitalist, they were big Marxists. Among themselves, their language was purely Islamic, and my book shows that. It's very clear. They called themselves Mujahideen, and they were not fighting the French colonists, they were fighting the infidels. That's how they looked upon the war. And this is what they began to learn to do as observers in Eretz Yisrael. In 1959, in March, Nasser says, let's create a Palestinian people, Kiyana Palestini in the Arabic, a Palestinian entity. Instead of calling, as they had for 10 years, the refugees of 1949, the Arab refugees, a generic term, because they had come from all over the place, let's call them the Palestinian nation. That was in March. In October of that year, 8 Muslim brothers in Palestine create a group, and they call it Fatah. And the leader is Abdul Rahman Arachim Muhammad Arafat, Al-Qudwa. Arafat and 7 other Muslim brothers decided to create a imitation resistance movement to the FLN, as it was called in Algeria. The FLN, the Front de Libération Nationale. And these 8 Muslim brothers decided they were going to have something similar. Arafat's father implanted the Muslim Brotherhood in Eretz Israel in 1939, when Arafat was 10 years old. Arafat was a Muslim brother all of his life. You only saw him in his green military jacket. That green military jacket was his imitation Fidel Castro costume. In 1959, Fidel Castro became famous, and Che Guevara in the romance of the revolution in Cuba, and he adopts their costume and calls himself a freedom fighter. But underneath, he remains a Muslim brother. Of the 8 who created this group, my book shows how they came upon the name Fatah. Fatah is Arabic for conquest, but understood in its full sense, it means conquest of the infidel. It is not a secular idea of anti-colonialism. It's an Islamic term. It's the title of the 48th chapter of the Quran. Why did they call it Fatah? Because 4 of these 8 guys, all of them had grown up in the Muslim Brotherhood, wanted something Islamic, and the other 4 had already started calling themselves Marxist-Leninists and had given up on Islam. They all had roots in the Brotherhood. And so they settled on Fatah. Why? Because it appeals to, first of all, the Muslim sensibilities of the people who are listening to them. It's a Quranic term meaning conquest of the infidel. Arafat was with that group. The other 4 wanted something more like the FLN, which means National Liberation Front. So they settled on Fatah. Why? If you know your Hebrew, Arabic is a cognate language. It's very similar. Everything is consonants. So Fatah in English, FTH, the consonants, also in Arabic, when you read it backwards, it's HTF. FTH and HTF in 2 different directions. When you read it backwards, in Arabic it's Harakat al-Tahrir al-Falastiniya, Palestine Liberation Organization. So both camps were happy. One wanted a name which was like the FLN, the Front for National Liberation, and the other one wanted something Islamic. And that's what they came up with. And that was in 1959. And they have their first terrorist attack in 1965. And the rest is history. This is the origin of this group, created by these Muslim brothers. Arafat was a Muslim brother to the day he died. And all of them are that way in a way, because they have no other group identity. Because there is no Palestinian history, culture, language, religion or religious sect, no Palestinian cuisine, no Palestinian dress. How do we know nations? How do we divide them one from the other? We have different ethnic symbols. Who wears kimonos? Who wears sombreros? Who wears berets? Who wears wooden shoes? You all know the answers to these questions. The Palestinians have no garment, they have no religion, no language, no food, no nothing. What they do have is Islam. The Ummah, as it's called, from the word mother. That's their group identity. The problem with the Muslims, the Arabs, is they've never risen to nationalism. They're a tribal people to this very day, and they've never made the jump that the Jews made at Mount Sinai in the 14th century BCE. When the 12 tribes leave Egypt, 12 tribes, and come together at Mount Sinai, and God appears and gives them the 10 Commandments and really the whole Torah, these 12 tribes become a nation in the 14th century BCE. That's how old the Jewish nation is. Some people like to make jokes about, oh, he's a member of the tribe. This is a subtle, cute form of anti-Semitism that Jews tell about themselves. We're not a tribe. We're a nation. Come to Israel, you see all the faces of humanity. Half of the Jews in Israel look like Jews, or your idea of a Jew, and the other half look like everybody else.
That's true.
All shades, all skin colors, all eye shapes, no difference. We are a nation like America is a nation. There is no American race, there's an American people that come from all over the world. Israel's the same way. But what they did, the enemy, is to accuse us of racism because that was fashionable at the UN. This is what's fashionable around the world. Whenever the world is upset about an issue, the Jews are guilty of it. So in the 20th century, following World War II, you have all these decolonized peoples around the world, the Spanish and the English and the French are giving up their colonies, the Jews become smeared with the concept of racism because you want a state just for Jews. They have states for 21 Arab states. As Muslims have, these are officially Arab states. There are 56 officially Muslim states. And when the Jews say, we want our own state, oh, that's racist, you don't want to live with us. That's what we have to put up with. Because anti-Semitism in every generation is definable by 3 words. Lying about Jews. Every time we have been persecuted, hounded, driven from our homes, tortured, it's always for good cause. The Jews are always guilty of something. People don't massacre Jews for no reason. All those calories expended for what? We've done something terrible. And we get what is coming to us. There's always a reason. And in our day and age, we Jews stole Palestine from the Palestinians, which is why Palestinian nationalism has become the successor to Nazism. And the successor, Islam, to Islam. Islam is a totalitarian ideology. So is communism. So is Nazism. And they all have this in common. Every one of these hates Jews. The Jews are the enemies of Nazis, the enemies of Muslims, the enemies of communists. Communism begins in atheism under Karl Marx. And they hated us. And Stalin, the day he died, he was planning to massacre all the Jews in the Soviet Union. He was going to out-Hitler Hitler. Palestinian nationalism is our anti-Semitism. I see you have Charles Jacobs coming. He will speak about how the Palestinian cause has taken over. This is true. His problem is he's still using the term. I never use it. When I write about the Palestinians, I use a capital B because they can't even say the name. They talk about Palestine. There's no P in the Arabic language. They can't even pronounce the country they claim is theirs from the beginning of time.
Philistine. You say Philistine.
Now they say Palestine because they can't say Palestina.
Yeah, actually pronounced Philistine.
This is where it comes from. For those who don't know, we have the word Pelashet in the Bible, which gives us the Plishtim, who are become the Philistines in English. It's from the Hebrew word liflosh, to invade. And they are seen as invaders. And the Plishtim are Hamites, like the Canaanites and like the Egyptians. And when Emperor Hadrian in the year 35 finished off the second war against the Jews, great massacres, this is when the great diaspora begins. He says, you Jews have given me more problems than any of the people in my empire, which is true. We're the only ones who kept resisting. This is the second big war. He says, not only am I going to destroy your country, I'm going to efface the name of your country in history. People won't even remember you. So he changed the name of Yehudah, which is what the Romans called Eretz Yisrael for 2 centuries. They came in the year 63 before the Common Era. This is now 135. For 2 centuries, the Romans called it Yehudah. Judea, as you see on this map. He says, we're going to call it now Philistia after the Philistines who had disappeared from history 1,000 years before. Not only that, I'm going to erase the name Jerusalem. And he called it Ilia Capitolina. Ilia was his family name, and Capitolina was after the triune, as it's called, the forerunner of the Christian notion of the Trinity. There were 3 gods in Rome, the Capitoline gods. And he said, now this will become Ilia Capitolina, and he built a Roman pagan temple on Har HaBayit, on the Temple Mount. And for the next 500 years, that was the name of Jerusalem, Ilia Capitolina. And when the Arabs come in the year 638, they ask, what's the name of this city? They say, Ilia. Okay, they called it Ilia for the next 500 years too. Not until the Crusades in the 11th century did the Arabs understand that this city is holy as a city. They accepted that the Temple Mount was a holy site. They understood the holy site, but not the whole city. And that's when they began to call it Al-Quds, which is the cognate of Kodesh in Hebrew, which means the holy. And it's really an abbreviated form of Al-Bet HaMakdas in Arabic, which in Hebrew is Habayat HaMikudash, the holy temple. They began to steal our holy temple. And this is Islam to this day. Islam to this day is recapitulated in the Palestinian national movement. What the Muslims did when they created Islam was basically to steal Judaism and rework it. Very different from what the Christians did. Both Christianity and Islam are offshoots of Judaism, everybody will agree. However, what the Christians did, to their credit, is they accepted what they call the Old Testament, our Tanakh, as it was, They have problems with it because it's always read in translation, and like all translations, it's inaccurate here and there, and some things are not understood. But basically, it's our Bible, which they accepted as theirs, and added their story. Added the story of Jesus and his disciples and the rest. The Muslims did something radically different, because the mentality is completely different. They took our Bible and they rewrote it. Changed it all around. And say it's the Jews who rewrote the Quran. In the Quran, Ibrahim binds his son Ismail for a sacrifice in Mecca. The Jews say, no, Abraham bound his son Yitzchak on the Temple Mount. The Muslims say, no, Ibrahim bound his son Ismail, not Ishaq, as they call him, and it was in Mecca. When a Muslim makes his Hajj, which is the Hebrew word Chag, when he goes around the Kaaba, this structure in the middle of the great mosque, it's one of the 5 commandments. When he does that, he is commemorating the binding of Ishmael by his father. And willy-nilly, he's also giving testimony to his belief that the Jews are liars and perverters of holy texts. When you confront a Muslim and say, hey, the Jews say it was Isaac who was bound for a sacrifice on the Temple Mount, and the Muslims say, no, it's Ishmael in Mecca, how do you explain the discrepancies? It's easy, the Jews are lying. Moses brought down from Mount Sinai the Quran. And these dastardly Jews down at the bottom rewrote it. Hagar, his mother, was not a shivcha, she was not an amma, she was not a serving girl. She was a legal wife. And it didn't take place in Jerusalem, it took place in Mecca. And that's what the Jews have done. They stole Islam from us. Because what Islam refers to, the very word refers to this world historical act of submission. That's what Islam means. It's got nothing to do with salam. Some people hear that. It's got a religion of peace. As George Bush once said, it's not a religion of peace. This religion is a religion of theft, in which they stole Jewishness, rewrote it, and accuse us of stealing it. Likewise, this is recapitulated, the same mental technique, in the Palestinian national movement. The word Palestine was invented to wipe out Judea. And that's precisely how it's being used in our time. After 2,000 years, the word Palestine was revived and is used for the same purpose, to wipe it out. So you have, among other things, in this vocabulary, West Bank. Every time you hear the name West Bank, you're listening to anti-Semitism. West Bank was invented to cover up what you see on these maps, Judea and Samaria. It's the equivalent of having numbers burned into our arms in Auschwitz. They took away our names. They took away the names our parents gave us. They gave us a serial number, which you might put on diseased cattle before you exterminate it, wipe it out. And that's what they did with West Bank. And so you read in the New York Times and the LA Times every day about the West Bank, which they now call the OPT at the UN. OPT, the Occupied Palestinian Territory. That's the official terminology. This is what the New York Times uses, what CNN uses, and everybody knows these settlements are illegal. This is not true. None of this is true. Anti-Semitism is lying about Jews. One of my favorite pastimes, if I could call it that, is listening to professors of political science, particularly out here in California, at San Francisco State or Berkeley. When they talk about those colonialists who have to give back the land they took, that it's happening in California, I think is hilarious. Here are these guys in San Francisco, which is a mispronunciation of San Francisco. And we're not in Los Angeles, we're in Los Angeles. Right? And it's not San Diego, and Santa Barbara, and Santa Cruz, and Monterrey, and Pasadena. You're living in occupied Mexican territory. You're all a bunch of racist, fascist, imperialist aggressors. You know your California history. Well, most people here are not born here. But we know, 1846, there's a war. Lasts for 2 years. Henry David Thoreau refuses to fight. He goes to jail as a conscientious objector. He thinks it's imperialist war. And so did that very tall Illinois congressman by the name of Lincoln. He didn't like that war either. He says, this is an imperialist aggression against Mexico. And when the war ended, the United States took half of Mexico, bit it off. The Mexico we know today is half the size it was before 1848. So when I see these academics looking down on La Bahia de San Francisco and calling us imperialists, this is just mind-boggling to me, and I find it amusing. In fact, I love it. It entertains me. It also shows you the power of Jewishness. The fact that we are so hated and people tell these cosmic lies about us shows you the power of the Jewish idea. And that's what we are wrestling with to this very day. What goes on at the UN, this is my research, you read in the prologue. I read 870 UN resolutions on the Arab-Israeli conflict from 1945 to 1989, did a statistical analysis. And what I'm going to tell you, you're not going to believe, but it's true, and you'll find it in the book. I tabulated all the things I read. They wanted a statistical workup, the Shamir people, because the Bush administration wanted to go to the UN for a peace conference. There's nothing doing. They said, no, you're paranoid, no. So they hired me to show in simple numbers how anti-Israel the UN was. And I uncovered facts like this, that the UN had condemned, the Security Council, Israel 49 times in those years, never condemned the Arabs. PLO was never condemned. And when you add up the aggregate number of votes against Israel in 45 years, the number came to over 55,000. Because you have, today you have 193 member states. And what they do at the UN is they write these resolutions with many parts and they vote on the many parts separately. So you have a resolution one day with 5 different votes, and it'll be anti-Israel, and it'll vote 5 times. And so just for a round number, say 100 nations vote against Israel, it comes out to 500 votes against Israel. You got 5 separate votes. You do that once. You do that 870 times, you come out with the number 55,000, I think 713, something like that. It's a form of calisthenics. Against Israel, against Israel, against Israel. That's what they're doing at the UN. A third of their business at the UN is bashing Israel. A third. They have an annual budget of over $1 billion, and that's how they spend their time, voting against Israel. It's like some kind of religious ritual, and that's what it is, because it's all religious. And this is why there's no peace, because the Israelis, God bless them, I love them, I'm an American and a Jew who lives in Israel many years. I'm proud as a citizen of Israel, but I'm not Israeli, like Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres and Yossi Beilin, all of the people who gave us the Oslo peace process, as it was called. They persist, and this is in the book, it's the last chapter, they persist in seeing the conflict as a conflict between 2 peoples, the Israelis and the Palestinians. One of the ironies and tragic ironies of the invention of the Palestinians is major inventors were the Jews themselves. The Israelis themselves. Why? Yossi Beilin has said this, Tzipi Livni has said it, they all say it. If we define this conflict as a religious clash of religious belief against religious belief, there's no solution. How can you change people's beliefs and religions? So, let's call it a political. It's a political conflict, yes. And since it's political, we can now have a compromise. We'll have our state, they'll have their state. The problem is the other side doesn't think in these terms at all. The other side is not interested in a state. They've been turning down offers for a state since 1937. Abu Mazen, all these guys, the last thing they want is a state, because then they would have to produce. They would have to take care of education and sanitation, old age policies. They don't want to do that. These are murderers. And they are grafters. They are crooks. Arafat put 2/3 of all the aid that came from the West in his private pocket. All of these guys have built themselves multi-million-dollar mansions, including this character. The whole thing is, as we say in Aramaic, Alma de Shikra, which means a world of lies. We live in a world of lies. This is what goes on at the UN, goes on in Israel, but they're still knocking their heads against the wall about let's have a Palestinian state and that'll solve our problem, because they want a state just like you. They don't want a state just like us. It's the last thing they want. They want to have to manage a state, and even if they got every inch of what they claim to demand now, they would still be smaller, they would be in competition, they would depend on us for employment, and we're not going to give them to this. By the way, I am the last person to worry about what Bibi Netanyahu is doing. It's a big issue. A lot of my friends in the settler movement, oh, he's going to sell us out. He's not going to sell us out. Nobody's going to sell us out. There are now, I think, 350 to 400,000 people living over the 1967 ceasefire line, which is really the 49 ceasefire line. In 2005, they chased out 10,000 Jews from Gaza. Half of those people to this day don't have homes, they don't have employment, they're living in these rickety so-called caravillas. It's a tragedy what happened to those people. They lost their livelihoods, they lost their homes, their gardens, everything. That was for 10,000 people. Now they're talking about 350,000 people. Who is going to drive 350,000 people out of their homes? Who's going to build them the new homes? Where are they going to be built? Israel's not what it used to be a generation ago. It's quite crowded down in a lot of places. It's a tiny country. It's the size, with Judea and Samaria, of Massachusetts. That's all it is. It's crowded now. Who's going to pay for this? Where's it going to happen? What astonishes me is you even have what I call the IBJs on my radio program, the Inside the Beltway Jews. The Inside the Beltway Jews. Of course, it's Thomas Friedman at the New York Times, but it's not only him. It's all of the court Jews who work in the State Department, Martin Indyk, Daniel Kurtzer, Aaron David Miller, all of these people. They're inside the Beltway Jews. You want to be inside the Beltway, you have to think like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant in the mold of James Baker. And they all look up to James Baker as their idea of a statesman. Even the otherwise great Charles Krauthammer. They talk about peace coming when all the settlements go. If all the settlements are closed down and all the people driven, this will make the expulsion from Spain in 1492 look like child's play. This is on a par with the Jews who fled Europe in World War II. And it's not going to happen. Because it can't happen. No one's going to drive us out, nobody's going to pay for it, and nobody is stupid enough to give up the high ground. That's all it is. Judea and Samaria are hills. They call it the West Bank. The West Bank is the West Bank, the bank of the Jordan River. When you step off the bank, you're no longer on the bank. West Bank is proof that these people have no name for what people call Palestine. That's why they call it West Bank. You would think after thousands of years of being in their ancient homeland, they'd have a name for it. West Bank's not a name, it's a topographical description. Many places in the world have names that resonate with history. You know, we have all of these saints' names in California. San Diego, Santa Barbara. Houston, Texas. You want to know about Sam Houston? Very interesting name. Created Texas. And so on and so forth. Pittsburgh, the Pitt family, father and son. Very interesting British statesman. West Bank, it has no resonance to any history. It's proof that there is no Palestinian people. We're fighting for our lives still in this jungle of words. My website is www. It's on the card. Deprogram program. It's listener sponsored. 3 times a week I broadcast a 30 to 40 minute program. It's a radio program, comes across the internet. It's half of my commentary on what's happening in Israel and the Jewish world in general, whatever's relevant. And the other half is the best music being made in Israel today. It's all religious music. It's fabulous, modern, light rock, and completely kosher. They're singing psalms, they're singing verses from the Torah, they're singing blessings, and it's gorgeous music. It doesn't make it out into the secular world, but that's their loss.
Yeah, I mean, I get the Box family, and
It's one of my subscribers.
Yeah.
It's wonderful music. So that's half of the program, and the other half. I call it Deprogram Program because I'm forever deprogramming these terms, one after the other. And I show in my book, that I hope you all buy, at Amazon.com. It's only available there. No conventional publisher would touch it. It's politically incorrect in the extreme. Any professor of political science would give me a big red F. You don't understand anything. And God willing, there'll be enough people to buy it in this format, either as this soft cover or as a Kindle, that eventually, because it'll be good business, a hardcover publisher will go for it. Until that time, I'll be satisfied that people buy what's available. And with that, I'll take a break. Let me take a question in the back. Robert.
First of all, I'd like to thank you and say that we have your volumes, and my husband's through the first 2, so...
Thank you.
And he keeps on raving about it.
Good.
I would like to know, based on what you said today, have you found any receptive to these facts within the United States government? Anybody?
Not in the United States government, but what is happening is very slow. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. Bibi Netanyahu actually dared to use the term anti-Semitism to describe the BDS movement. One of our biggest problems are the Israelis. Love them dearly, but they began with this may come as a shock to some people to think this, but I can't avoid it. Zionism was not an attempt by the secular and particularly left-wing Zionists to save the Jewish people, but to get away from them and to transform them. Enough of this chosen people stuff. They're always killing us. You keep kosher and your Gentile neighbor invites you to dinner and you refuse. Oh, you don't like my food, I'm dirty. Stop the kosher business, stop the chosen people business, become normal. With my own eyes, I watched Shimon Peres on McNeil Lehrer 20 years ago as he's negotiating behind the scenes illegally with the PLO, saying the purpose of Zionism is to normalize the Jewish people. Therefore, excuse me, anti-Semitism does not affect them. Anti-Semitism is a problem of Jews in the diaspora. We don't suffer from it. We don't know about it. And in fact, tragically, it's true. Israelis like this, the secular Israelis, don't understand it. They read about it, have at best an intellectual concept of anti-Semitism, but they think, I just heard it 2 weeks ago at a Sabbath meal with my neighbor's son, who grew up in Judea. I don't know how religious he is now, but he's a nice kid, married, got a little boy now. He's amazed that there still is hostilities now that we have our own country. The theory of secular Zionism said that once we have our own country, anti-Semitism will evaporate because we're living as another nation inside of other nations and there's friction and we're different from them and yada, yada, yada. Let's get out, have our own cute little country, and anti-Semitism will disappear. It's a complete misunderstanding of the persecution of the Jews from the beginning of time. It's not material. It's spiritual. Slowly, sheer force of circumstance, are beginning to get, this is the first inclination of Israelis like Bibi, who has his great good points, and he has his deficits. But he's now beginning to see that what's going on, particularly this BDS movement, and what goes on at the UN, this is old-fashioned Jew hatred in modern dress. Now the excuse is you stole Palestine from the Palestinians. Before you killed God, now you stole it. This thing metamorphoses. There's a metamorphosis in Jew hatred from generation to generation. You read what people said about Jews 500 years ago, it's not the same. Some forms of Jew hatred are situational. In 1348, we were blamed for poisoning the wells in Europe, so a third of Europe died. So we were massacred by the thousands. There's no more Black Death, so nobody accuses us of poisoning wells anymore. Except Hillary Clinton's friend, Sua Arafat. She told Hillary Clinton to her face that the Jews were poisoning the water supply in Gaza. And Hillary just stood there. She doesn't know what she's looking at. She doesn't know what she's listening. Yeah, Robert.
Yeah. There is a problem. About post-Zionism, and you bring up, I've read other things like Yom Chazoni's book, The Struggle for the Jewish State. Yeah. And the Supreme Court, I spoke to somebody from Ariel, I think his name is Sion. He's a law professor.
Thank you so much.
He's teaching at Ariel. He wants to teach Zionism, the Jewish right, according to the international law about League of Nations. But the Israeli Supreme Court, I told them, how can you have Hasbara when the Israeli Supreme Court says that Gaza, when they had this invasion...
This is a very good point. It's a point I didn't make and I should have made. Yeah. People sometimes ask me, why is Israel's PR so bad? And it's my book, which is the answer to that question. Once you accept the notion of a Palestinian people as they define it, you can have no PR. You're admitting, as Bibi admitted, yes, they deserve a state. So if that's the case, what are you waiting for? You're admitting that there's a Palestinian people which has real estate rights to Palestine. And that's what Bibi wants to do. What Israelis like Bibi never do is they never speak of Jewish rights. Ever. 1 second. I'll make the point and I'll get to you. What we hear is they have rights and we have security interests. And I ask you, two men are arguing. One has security interests, the other one has rights that are thousands of years old. Who wins that argument? You cannot do that. Once you the Palestinian people is like a computer virus which gets into your operating system and bollocks up everything. Once you accept the notion of a Palestinian people with territorial rights to Eretz Yisrael, you're finished. There's nothing you can say except we're leaving on such and such a date. What Israel has to do is what Golda said, which caused all the trouble, which is the opening of my book. She said, there are no Palestinian people. Stop the nonsense. This is our land 3 times over. 1, the League of Nations said so. Palestine was created for the Jewish people. It's in black and white. No reference to Palestinians whatsoever. 2, in 1967, as in 1948, we were attacked. We drove the attacker off the high ground. What's happened in the world is that the concept of to the victor goes the spoils applies to every people except us. We have to give back what we took in self-defense. And what? Give the enemy a chance to do it again, and this time succeed? Israel has to say that as Germany was reduced after World War II, the Poles got a piece, the Czechs got a piece, 44,000 square miles of Germany was taken away. Why? Mida keneged mida in Hebrew. What goes around comes around. Karma. Measure for measure, Shakespeare stole from Mida keneged mida from the Bible. The Germans came to take away land from the Czechs and the Poles and all their neighbors. And what's the punishment? You lose land. It's the perfect punishment for the German aggression against their neighbors. Israel has to say, as Germany became smaller after World War II, so the Arab world is smaller after World War II. We have the right to keep every square meter that we shed blood for. That's the second reason. The third reason is, this is our religion. This is an aggression against Judaism. Who is John Kerry to tell us we don't want any Jews living in Judea and Samaria? That's what he said. This is our religion. What are you doing attacking my religion? Who are you? By what right do you do this? But we don't speak of our rights. The Israelis have been holding out since 1967 the idea that they can sell back a piece of what they took and the Arabs will sign on the dotted line. This is madness. This is just totally unreal. So I want to call this gentleman.
Can you expand on the Beltway Jews, why they feel the way they do?
Why they feel the way they do?
Right.
That's easy.
They're afraid of being Jews and they want to be...
They have a nice life. They have prestige, good salary, their kids go to the best schools, and they're loved by the Gentiles. Martin Indyk, all of these people, the technical term is court Jew. Kissinger, though, was called a Jew boy. And that's who these people are. This is what Nixon's called Kissinger. Why? Because whenever they talked about the Arabs, the Arab war against Israel, Kissinger was the most anti-Israel guy in the room. And why? Because as I've heard from good authority, he was so traumatized by what happened to him in Germany as a teenage kid. Imagine, he was 14, 15-year-olds when these German boys are running around in their stormtrooper uniforms beating up Jews in the streets. He's totally traumatized, can't deal with it. And Nixon, who was not an anti-Semite in his heart, I think he was a superficial country club guy who tells Jew jokes maybe in the locker room, but when push came to shove in 73, he knew who his friends were. Israel. And he called Kissinger a Jew boy because he was acting like one. Utter self-abasement. And these guys, Indyk, Aaron David Miller, Richard Haas, Danny Kurtzer, all these guys, they get these jobs, and what they do is they go to the State Department, they're in my book, and they say, I'm your Jew boy. You want me to bash the Jews for you, to shield you from being called an anti-Semite? I'm ready. Just give me a good salary, give me prestige, give me a nice home, give me kids go to a good school. These are the IBJs. This is Thomas Friedman. This is Jeffrey Goldberg. It pays to sell out your people. Sir?
Do you see a way that Israel can work its way out of this self-apologetic syndrome that it's placed itself in?
Yes, it's happening right now by sheer demographics. What we call the Tzonim, the North Tel Aviv types, the bourgeois, the nouveau riche, they're having, like here, 2.1 kids, less than 2.1 kids. You all know the Pew study from the fall. Jews in this country, the non-observant Jews, are going out of business. They're in Chapter 11, demographically speaking. I once did a piece for Midstream 20 years ago, and it was already clear by then that more Jews have been lost here through assimilation than in the Holocaust. Over 6 million Jews have disappeared. Every year the official Jewish organizations say we got 5.5 million Jews, 5 million Jews. They've been saying this for 20 years. It's not true. There may be less than 2 million Jews who do something Jewish. If you're not observant, then you're doing what Doris is doing. You know, there's all different ways to remain a part of the Jewish people. The best way, of course, is to be observant, because that's all you can transfer to your kids. But then there are other alternatives that people stay loyal one way or the other. But outside this community, the Jewish community in America is disappearing. In Israel, their counterparts are also disappearing. The religious Jews in the two large camps of the Haredim and the National Religious Camp, which is my camp, are having 5 to 10 kids a family. So what you're going to see in a very short time is a new voting pattern. Old labor is gone. The labor of Golda Meir, may she rest in peace, and Yitzhak Rabin, and all of these people, Abba Eban, they're gone. There's no more labor Zionist movement. Now they have Bougie Herzog, who doesn't know anything. He's a very simple little man. So I'm very optimistic for the future of Israel, also because I say no one's going to give up the land. You can't give up this land. We have radar installations on the high ground of Judea and Samaria. And we're not going to give those up. And if we're not going to give those up, you have to have soldiers on the ground. If you have soldiers on the ground, you're going to have people living there. That's when I changed my politics. For the first 12 years after the Six-Day War, I was a trendy lefty, until I realized that the Arabs have another agenda. Everybody thought, oh, we'll give back the land and they'll make peace with us. After 12 years of mass murder and all of these terrorist atrocities, hey, they're not rushing to make this deal that we think they're going to make. They're still playing this game. They're still playing this game. That's what the peace talks are all about. Yes?
We have a lot of friends that we grew up with that are highly educated, and we have no friends that are Republicans, no friends that are anti-Obama, no friends of that ilk.
You're among friends.
And what happens? We're amongst friends. And so what happens is, like, the best man at our wedding, we get together and, unlike our other friends who agree that's a topic we've never discussed, they keep on bringing it up and showing us how wrong we are, and it's really annoying.
Yes?
But in general, everybody, the school principal of my child's private Jewish school tells the seniors who are ready to vote in his Get Ready for College class that Obama's the best thing that ever happened for the state of Israel.
I have no words for you. What can I tell you?
Okay, so, well, the thing is, my fear is that I work at the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. And my fear is that what I see in America today is pre-Nazi Germany. Okay, because let me tell you one story here, and I'm not naming names or anything, so don't ask me. My child, freshman this year in college, send her back east to a school. She's a child who never left home, never went to camp. Send her there because they have a Hillel rabbi on campus, a kosher kitchen at the school. Out of 1,500 kids, 400 are Jewish. She's there 1 week. A Nazi flag goes up in the dorms.
What can I tell you?
There's a hearing. The only child out of 400 Jews, my daughter, in that room. She's not allowed to bring anybody to that hearing. The Hillel rabbi didn't show up, didn't ask what happened at the hearing. Her friends at that time, Jew and non-Jew, think she's the problem and it's just a mess.
You must read the Book of Numbers and the stories of Bilam. You know Bilam? Bilam is a Gentile prophet. Jews recognize that other religions have prophets. And he is called by Balak, who is the king of Moab, to come and curse the Jews who are on the verge of invading Eretz Yisrael. And he walks up to a high ground overlooking this mass of Israelites in their encampment, over 1 million of them. And he's called to curse them. But everything that comes out of his mouth is praise. And he looks at them, and God controls his mouth the way he controls his donkey It's the story of the talking donkey, Bilam's donkey. His mouth is taken over by God, and he takes over Bilam's mouth. And what does he see? He sees this Israelite encampment, over 1 million people, and he says, this is a people that will dwell alone. The Israelis who don't read the Torah and don't understand it say, oh, that's terrible. We don't want to live alone. We want to be normal. One of the peoples. It is the deepest compliment when you live alone. What Bilam saw in the 14th century BCE is 1 million tribesmen living in harmony according to a book of laws. They got sanitation, they got judges, they got constables, they got policemen, and this is unbelievable. To this day, the Arabs are butchering each other in Syria and Lebanon, in Iraq, in Libya, in Yemen. It goes on constantly in that world, not in ours. But that means that since you are living alone, you have a special gift of truth. It's always been that way. There's nothing new here. What's only new is it's in your life and my life that this is happening. We are a people blessed with the destiny of living by the truth, while everybody else is living a lie. John Kerry lives a lie. He doesn't know what's going on in the Middle East. We don't live lies. And that your daughter is suffering, she'll survive. She just has to understand that this is what it means to be a Jew, is to live a life of truth when everybody else is crazy. And I want to leave you with this thought. This is the children of Jewish Holocaust survivors. We have no problem in the West thinking of the Germans, oh, those crazy Nazis. And not only Germans, by the way. I think to some extent they get a raw deal because they were not alone. It was the Austrians and the Poles and the Lithuanians and the Latvians and the French and the Dutch. Lots of people.
And the Ukrainians.
And the Ukrainians. Lots of people's got in on the act. Right? That is what was the Holocaust. And I'm suggesting to you now that the Arabs are as crazy about Jews as any Nazi. And I'll even go further. They're crazier. They're crazier. Why are they crazier? The Germans, Yimach Shemam, for what they did to us, nonetheless, if we set aside for a moment this terrible time, by the way, the Germans, every couple centuries, they did this to the Jews one way or another. It's part of their history. If we set that aside for a second, the Germans are a remarkable people. They're musicians. I was listening to Bach coming up here today. Glorious music. They're cultured, they're engineers, they're scientists, remarkable people, and they made contributions. And when Hitler, Machimo, ran in the elections of 1932, he didn't win a majority. He was a Southerner, like American South. He was from the South, he was from Austria. The people in Berlin, the sophisticates, the New York types, thought he was a jerk. He didn't win a majority of the voters. It was due to the parliamentary system. Hindenburg chose him to put up a coalition.
Like the Israeli system.
Yeah, like the Israeli system. Crazy. And the rest is history. With the Arabs, there is no creme de la creme. The guy at the top thinks like the illiterate peasant at the bottom. I follow the Arab press every day. I don't read Arabic, but you have memory.org, if you're familiar with that website, which is a translation service. And every day they're pumping out translations of what's in the Arab press, what's in the Persian press, Farsi, Pakistan.
Memory.org.
MEMRI.org.
Also Palestinian Media Watch.
Palestinian Media Watch focuses specifically on the news, the newspapers and the radio and the TV in Eretz Yisrael among the Arabs. I call them Arabs.
We have another guy, Mordechai Kedar.
Right, he's an independent guy, he's wonderful. But in terms of these two websites, memory.org, MEMRI.org gives you translations. And the creme de la creme, their leaders, their priests are Looney Tunes. They're living in the 7th century. There's a moment in my book when I'm writing about the Algerian revolt against the French, which I say was a model. And the Algerian rebels are telling war stories to each other about this truck of fighters. It was an open truck with a canvas top that were riding along, and they were stopped by a French patrol. The French patrol opened the back of the truck, and what did they see? 20 sheep. So they let it go. Closed the canvas, and it went on. And what happened? What happened is that Allah changed the 20 soldiers into sheep at that moment, so all they saw was sheep, and when he closed it, they turned it back into men. This is in the 1950s. People are still thinking this way. You have no idea how crazy they are. But you can't talk that way. We have to be nice to them. Yes?
Could you just comment briefly on the Arab population in Israel
Yes.
And on the media in Israel propagandizes exactly, as best as I know, as the U.S. media.
Yes.
And thus the other 4 million Jews and so-called Jews in America are anti-Semites. The worst form come from our community.
Yes, as in Israel.
And 2 million religious Jews have trouble going the whole way in their thinking. They're pro-Israel, they vote right, but they emotionally have trouble dealing with the entirety of the problem. And simply
So you want me to talk about the
talk about the Arab population.
Arab population in Israel?
And the media. And disagree with me where...
No. The Arab population,
How they differ or not.
they're not stupid, and they watch television like you and me, and they know what's going on in Syria. They know what's going on in Iraq. They know what's going on in Libya. They know what's going on in Egypt. They know what's going on in Yemen. They're not stupid. And the best of them will tell you, this is the best place to live. I've had Arabs tell me this. This is the best place to live, so they don't make trouble. There's very little troublemaking from the Arabs in Israel because they're not stupid, and they see what's happening elsewhere. And in Israel, they have a life.
And the Bedouin population
That's another...
had a steeper
There's a problem. There's a problem with the Bedouin because they're Bedouin. They're much on a lower level of civilization. And they're acting like Arabs. The Bedouin are thieves because all of the Arabs are thieves. That's their culture. This is the Midrash. You ever seen Lawrence of Arabia?
Yes, twice.
Okay. Right. There's a scene where he gets them to attack a Turkish troop train.
Yes.
They attack, and each one makes off with some booty and drifts off into the desert. And Allah says, where are you going? We have another raid. Don't you want to be freedom fighters for the Arab nation? We came here to steal the stuff on the train. This is the Midrash that goes back almost 2,000 years. Ishmael is a thief. And he's not only a thief in terms of your money and your car. Israel is the auto theft capital of the world as a result of that. They steal from each other. And when it comes to religion, they steal your religion. And that's who the Bedouin are. So they've moved in to southern Israel, and they claim this is our land. We've been here since the beginning of time. What can we do? We're doing the best I can. We're losing the Negev. It's very unfortunate. Yes?
Could you help me understand the situation? I work in a town in North Orange County, and there's no Muslims there that I see, and a mosque is going up.
Yes.
It's right near a Christian university.
Yes.
Could you help me to understand that?
Yes, the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the Qataris are funding the building of mosques all over the United States. And the purpose is to convert us. And what you have, by my analysis, is a Muslim Brother agent whose office is the Oval Office. This man is working for the Muslim Brotherhood. There are a half dozen Muslim brothers in the White House in the West Wing. Hillary's right-hand woman, Dean, what's her name? Abedin is one of them. I will tell you more about this is the project. If I were living here and I wanted to become active here, I would start a movement to outlaw Islam, and it could be done relatively easy because there's a precedent for it. The Mormons. If you know your Mormon history, the Mormons were driven from town to town from the east because they were polygamists. And they went out to Utah territory, and they stayed there and created their culture and applied for statehood for 50 years and got nowhere because Washington was saying, you people are polygamists, we're not going to let you into the Union. America grew by, this goes back to Thomas Jefferson's ideas, from the 13 original colonies, he developed a system of settling territories, and when you get, I think, 30,000 settlers in the territory, you can apply for statehood. Jefferson was the world's most progressive and greatest imperialist. Jefferson wanted Canada, the United States, Central America, and South America to be the United States of the West. Not as an imperialist, in which they're going to be dictated to from Washington, but fellow states join the corporation, buy shares. We wanted all these countries to become part of one large United States of the West as equal partners. And when the Mormons kept asking for statehood, Washington said, no, you people are polygamists. As far as I know, in every state of the Union, polygamy is illegal.
So far.
Yeah.
So far.
We have gay marriage.
I know, that's the next step, right. As of now, it remains illegal. And it should be no difficult thing to file a petition in a court and ask for federal marshals to bring a lock and key and padlock these mosques. These are polygamists. This is illegal. They shouldn't be allowed in this country. Obama, in his inaugural address, hinted at where he was going to go. He slapped the Jewish people in the face within a minute. of becoming president. Nobody paid any attention. I paid attention because my, my meat and potatoes is language. Obama said this within about a minute of taking the oath on the back of the Capitol. He says, this is a great country, you know, the old melting pot. Great country. We're a country of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus. What? This is not a Christian and Muslim country. This is a Judeo-Christian civilization. When this country was founded, there wasn't one Muslim living here. There were no Muslims living here until the end of the 19th century, and those were the Lebanese Christians who began to show up. Islam had absolutely nothing to do with this country. On the contrary, under Jefferson, the great foreign policy nut for years was the Barbary Pirates I mentioned earlier. For 40 years, the number one policy problem in this country was Islamic terrorism. That was called piracy when it wasn't piracy. That's who Islam is a crusading religion. It's here to take over. And when he said what he said, he relegated the Jews to position 3 instead of 2. We've always been the second religious group here, Christians and Jews. We were here on the American Revolution. We were here in colonial days. We've served in every war. The Jews have played their role in this country.
He said that in the State of the Union. Jews, he mentioned third.
Jews, he mentioned third, and grouped us with the Hindus who are seen as...
State of the Union over there.
Yeah. Then he went to Cairo in June, and he said there that there are 6 million Muslims in America. 6 million. Where did he get that number from?
Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood says that. That's what the CARE, the American Islamic Religion.
Yes.
Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes, to take the place of the 5 million Jews. He did it twice. In other words,
The number 2 in Homeland Security says.
exactly. So the Jews are elbowed out. You're no longer in the second position. You're in the third position, and you're grouped with the idolaters in the Hindu religion.
Can you continue your thought about Hinduism, seen as?
Hinduism?
Yeah, you're saying Hinduism.
He grouped us. He said Christians and Muslims, comma. You look at the text. Jews and Hindus. He grouped us with the hated Hindus, who are considered to be idolaters, and with good reason. That's what he said in his inaugural speech. And then when he goes to Cairo, if you check on the White House website, you'll see that the speech was given at Cairo University. This is a lie. This man is a chronic, compulsive, pathological liar. He cannot stop lying. When it says Cairo University, there may have been some sponsorship that they began with, but he didn't speak at Cairo University. He spoke at Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar is the Harvard and Yale and Princeton of Islamic fundamentalist terrorists.
Wow.
And they said, oh, he invited the Muslim Brotherhood. Everybody in the audience was Muslim Brotherhood. That's where they get their training.
Mubarak wasn't even there.
Sorry?
Even Mubarak wasn't there.
That's right. The government boycotted his speech. The Saudis just yesterday officially declared the Brotherhood a terrorist organization. And this guy supports the Brotherhood everywhere. Everybody in the Middle East Arabs, they hate him because they understand the people who run the show, that he's on their side. That's why I say he's a Muslim brother. Yes?
Do you have a source for the Al-Azhar? Because I think in the New York Times transcript of his speech, it says Cairo University.
That's wrong.
Sponsored by or co-hosted by Al-Azhar.
He spoke at Al-Azhar. He didn't speak at Cairo University.
Is there a source or something?
Yes, you can look it up. If you have to go digging, you'll find it.
Kind of a background.
He was not at Cairo University. He was at Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar is where Hajj Amin studied. They all studied there.
Sunni.
It's the that's right, everything is there.
Isn't his father?
1 second. Yeah.
Isn't his father also a Muslim?
His father was a Muslim, yeah, Kenyan Muslim.
Part of the Muslim Brotherhood.
That I don't know. That I don't know.
His half-brother is.
Let me get a fresh face.
I have a question about the role of Christians in the Middle East, because for many years, what the so-called Palestinian national movement was led by Christians.
Yes.
Because for them, that was the trump card to be admitted.
Correct.
The Muslim majority. So George Habash,
right.
Haddad,
all Christians.
Now the thing is, now I think they're rocking the boat, and they're getting the boat rocked, because on the one hand, the Muslims hate their guts. They don't want to side with the Jews because, they're not afraid of Israel. They're afraid of the Muslims.
Yes.
So you still see, they still continue with the rhetoric, but you have this priest from the Galilee who says we have to join the idea.
Yes.
We have to go. And then he gets threats. His son
exactly right.
Not be natural.
This is a good movement.
I mean, because they're the ones who are stuck between, and I think in this country, when you're working among non-Jews and you simply speak about the Christians in the Middle East, what will happen to them? What happened to the Jews of the Middle East?
Yes.
It will become an extinct,
What's happening now?
Right.
Half of the 400,000 Christians in Iraq are gone. over the last 10 years. They fled. And of course the Copts just get murdered, you know, here and there, another 2, another 3, every weekend, another Copt gets murdered.
There's a saying, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people.
That's right. Yes?
Well, to make matters worse, some of the most prominent Christian leaders in the U.S. are signing petitions with the Muslims saying we all worship one God and we should all unite.
The Presbyterians did that.
I can't remember the names of the Christian leaders.
There are some, they're divided. We have, though, the Sarah Palins and the Michelle Bachmans, who represent these evangelicals who are more Zionists than the Zionists. Yes, now.
Does the Israeli press repeat the lies?
Yes.
Exactly, word for word, like their American brothers. And then population, which seems to me to be getting dumbed down in Israel also. American school kids are just getting fed total propaganda.
Yes.
They're brain dead. UCLA, they're brain dead.
Yes.
So,
well, that's because of their actions of
Israel is the same thing is happening.
Yes.
So how does Israel get protected then? If the population is here, their brothers and sisters are anti-Semites, basically.
I used to, for a time I broadcast on Arutz Sheva, Israel National News, and before I was finally fired, for reasons that had nothing to do with anything I said on the air, I was almost fired for what I did say, which I did a phony, because my politics are no different than the people who run that show, run the place. I said, made as a radio jest, I said, Haaretz, read Haaretz, the first anti-Semitic newspaper in the Holy Tongue. They nearly threw me off because they were afraid of the powers that be in Jerusalem that they were going to crack down on them. Haaretz is an anti-Semitic newspaper, chad v'chalak, as we say. And what can we do about it? They are so far, and the irony is the name of the newspaper. Haaretz. They are saying constantly, give Haaretz away.
Didn't you say it's like the cousins of the New York Times?
They are, in many ways, because the Schocken family are like the Sulzbergers. These were German Jews who were post-religious. Yes, sir.
What is your solution to the Arabs that live in Israel and Yehuda and Samaria?
About the ones who have citizenship, I thought it was a historic mistake.
All the Arabs, citizen, not citizen.
No, things have happened. And I have no great wisdom about what to do with the Arabs with citizenship. The ones without citizenship, I do have an answer. This is the people, the Arabs living in Judea and Samaria. You declare that we will treat you as individuals with full human respect. As individuals, we will treat you like Jews. You have rights to your property, to good work laws, to education, yada, yada, yada. You will not vote in our Knesset. There are 21 Arab states. There are 56 Muslim states, and every one is some kind of legislature. Every one of them is Jew-free. We're entitled to have a Knesset, which is Arab-free. What's the problem? So what you do is you offer these people this deal, and if they don't like the deal, they're free to leave. You're not going to give them the vote. Caroline Blick, bless her heart, Yoram Ettinger, I have the highest respect for the both of them. They're on this kick of we got to annex the territories, which I agree with 100%, because it's ours. We have to fight for our rights and stop talking about these security interests, which doesn't interest anybody. So we have to annex the territory. At the same time, what you do with the people is you don't give them citizenship. This is death. It's death.
And what happened with Amle Vadad Ishkon?
What about?
Mingle with us and they live with us.
The Torah is
from them and they're going to be in Tel Aviv all over.
The Torah is clear that it was never imagined that Israel, Eretz Yisrael, would be 100% Jewish. There is legislation in the Torah and the Talmud regarding non-Jews.
That's 20% of us. More than 20%.
This is another issue, but I'm talking about the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. You tell them we're going to respect you as individuals. You will have no national vote in our legislature. Accept it, fine. You don't accept it, then leave. Yes?
What are some things that we could do here, me as one little person, or...
Every time you hear the word Palestinian, correct them. It begins with words, and the 1,000-mile journey begins with one step. I hear the word Palestinians, and I say, excuse me, there are no Palestinians. And then when they come back at you, what do you mean? You say, you tell me about them. Give me a sentence about their language, their culture, their cuisine, their garments, their history, their kings, their famous battles. What do you know about these people? It's a phantom. It's a verbal construct which is used to beat the Jews over the head.
Have you mentioned that to Netanyahu?
I don't speak to him. He doesn't know me.
It was a rhetorical question.
What was he doing here last week?
I was out here, I don't know, doing business.
I just heard he was here, and even if
yes,
it wasn't
he crapped up the 405 yesterday, no?
He signed an agreement with Jerry Brown for California and Israel to work together. I thought that was terrific.
Yeah, fine.
Yes.
He's a businessman at heart.
Yes, it was a beautiful picture.
I want to get a fresh voice. Behind you.
Sorry, I guess it's my turn. I heard recently that there's going to be an Israeli TV station as opposed to like out in Al Jazeera.
It's already up.
Okay.
I-24.
So, and I'm wondering, do you think it's going to be effective in combating the propaganda?
I'm ignorant of the project, and I can't comment on it. I don't know. Okay. I'm sorry. Yes.
I have a question. Yeah. You worked with Shamir on the Madrid conference.
I worked for his boss.
Learning about James Baker, I thought his bachelor thesis at Princeton, and it was against the Jewish. It was against Israel. It was Bevin versus Bevin.
Right.
How come? Did the Israeli government know about this, and how come did they know what they're dealing with, and what happened?
The problem of Israelis like Bibi.
I'm not talking about Shamir.
Shamir is similar in a way.
Yeah.
The Zionist movement was led by post-Jewish Jews. And what do I mean by Jewish? I say it as an observant Jew. When I came to that late in life, I was not born an observant Jew. And I only came to being an observant Jew when I realized that the only thing that keeps this people alive is the religion. We are a unique people because of our religion. Every other nation defines itself in terms of its territory, the French, or their language, or their cuisine. We have all that stuff. But when you reduce Judaism to bagels and lox on Sunday, you can't pass that on to your kids. Everybody's eating bagels and lox on Sunday now. The only thing that keeps us alive is the mitzvot, and that's why it says, Asher kichanu mitzvotav. God created us to keep His mitzvot, which are in many cases totally non-rational, they're not irrational, but non-rational behaviors. That's what defines us. And that's how you stay alive.
So because there's a little thing, I'm just talking about psychological profile. I know when Israel, and this is...
Well, no, let me finish my point. Is that the Zionist movement was created by people who were influenced by the outer society. When the Christians gave up their religion, the Jews were happy. Like in Soviet Union, half the Communist Party was Jewish. All the big shots were Jewish. Zinoviev and Kamenev and all these, and Trotsky, all of these people. Because they saw, like the Christians, who saw in Palestinian nationalism an escape from their second-class status, the Jews saw in the Communist Revolution, we'll stop being Jews and we'll all be the Brotherhood of Workers internationally, the International Brotherhood of Man. And the Israelis were in that hothouse of ideas. We're going to become a normal people. And we want to get along with everybody. So a man like Bibi, and even Shamir, they are desperate to be accepted. And when everybody is telling you that you have to be nice to the poor Palestinians, the victims of your Zionism, okay, we'll work something out. Instead of saying, there are no Palestinians, they have no rights here, this is our country. That's how you have to answer these people. They don't want to do that because then they'll hate you. And they don't want to be hated.
I just want to say, there are other
voices.
Yeah, so...
Yes, in the back, sir. Who bought my book and likes it. Thank you.
I loved your book.
Thank you.
Your book has a very interesting take on the Camp David Accord between Begin and Sadat. I think it'd be very interesting to hear what you have to say about that here.
In the 1979? Yes, well, I felt that Begin sold out the Jewish people as much as nobody's perfect. Everybody makes blunders. This was his great blunder. At Camp David in 79, he recognized the Palestinians as an entity. That was his fatal mistake. He never should have done that. What he had in his mind, because he was born 1915 or so, 1918, something like that, he grew up in a world in which 19th century ideas were still quite current. He grew up in a world of the Habsburg Austro-Hungarian Empire, in which you had these small little peoples under the great empire, and he wanted to offer the Palestinians some kind of autonomy, thinking this will satisfy them. This is what everybody said, isn't that nice? Huge mistake. Golda, who begins my book, was, as they used to say, the toughest man in the cabinet. She understood the truth. She also appears elsewhere in the book in 1970, when Jordan was being threatened with being roved by the Syrians, and Ariel Sharon and others were saying, let's let them do it, and they'll take over, the PLO will take over Jordan, they'll have their state, they'll just change the name, yada yada. Golda said, there are no Palestinians, enough of this. And she was 100% right. But the others want to get along. They don't want to be a people that dwells alone. So they're constantly making these deals. And look how Bibi was backed into his Bar Ilan speech 5 years ago. Yes, we'll have a Palestinian. He's playing this game, which makes sense in the short term, which is, yes, I'm for a Palestinian state, but I have certain conditions, each one of which destroys the notion of statehood. He doesn't want a Palestinian state, and all of his conditions destroy it. He says, yeah, you'll have your state, but we'll control your borders, we'll control your airspace, we'll control your water supply, but you'll have your state. Please. That's what he's doing. And that's one of the reasons people are angry with him, because everybody understands that beneath the rhetoric, it's all BS on his part. Instead of coming out and saying, no, this is our land for the 3 reasons I gave you. Begin made the same mistake, because Begin too wanted to be accepted among the nations of the world. He was less religious than his father. So we call Yeridot Hadarot. Yeridat Hadarot. Abraham was the most righteous Jew who ever lived, and in every generation we lose some of it. It gets worse. Yeah, Roy.
I think most Israelis would probably be pretty happy with giving up their rights as Jews, Judeans, in order to end belligerence against the state of Israel.
I used to think that too.
I think most Israelis would do that if they actually thought that they could end belligerence. Is there anything to be done to end belligerence against Israel?
No.
Or is it just basically...
I'm glad you mentioned this.
An eternal struggle?
Very good point to make. I was a student of religion at Columbia, and then I went to graduate school at the University of Chicago. Christianity is such that you can have a Sarah Palin and a Michelle Bachmann and other supporters of Israel. The Christians have a Bible which is 2/3 our book. And they study it to a degree. And they are as amazed as we are that we're back. 2,000 years we're praying 3 times a day, take us back, and we're back. And we built this remarkable little country. It's quite amazing. There are Christians who are also flabbergasted by this event and see, yes, the God of Israel promised to return the Jews, and he did. And so they can support us. And they have learned to outgrow their hatred, which was so characteristic of the Roman Catholicism, right? The Muslims, by contrast, cannot accept the state of Israel. Islam collapses if they accept the state of Israel. This is a religious war par excellence, which is why all the stuff about Palestinians is a smokescreen, it's an invention. Specifically, the subtitle of my book, Inventing the Palestinians as the Obstacle to Peace, this is what happened in the 1970s. The book very much focuses in on Resolution 242, which was passed in November of 1967 as the conclusion of the Six-Day War. And this resolution basically calls upon the belligerent states, there's very few words in that resolution, to make peace. The belligerent states, Israel, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt. The PLO has rejected 242 because it never mentioned the ancient Palestinian people and their rights to a state. This is after the fact. There's no reference in 1967, not until 1970, my book shows, is there any reference to Palestinians. They are rewriting history. And they're doing it because the Muslim Brotherhood, and Arafat was a Muslim brother, they cannot accept the existence of the right of a Jewish state, period. Peace will come when either the Mashiach comes, or, as part of the process of Mashiach coming, the Muslims will undergo a spiritual, intellectual process like the Christian world, which went through a reformation, a counter-reformation, a renaissance, an enlightenment, where they come to the position that they have today. These Muslims have to go through a process of coming to grips with the right of Jews to our state. This is one of the things I have a problem with Bibi is. His formulation is good, but not good enough for me. He says they have to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, or the state of the Jewish people. They're never going to do it, and I would change the Lashon, I would change the formula. I would say they have to recognize the right of the Jewish people to have their own state and to be free of Muslim persecution. These people have persecuted us on a daily basis for 14 centuries. I reject completely the notion that it was bad in Europe, only it was better with our Semitic brothers. This is nonsense. In every generation there were pogroms, there were daily restrictions against the Jews, humiliations, not on the grand scale that we saw in Europe, not only in the Holocaust, but the Khmelnytsky massacres and so on and so forth. Islam has to undergo some kind of transformation for there to be peace. In its current state, with these people still living in the 7th century in their heads, there's no hope for peace, and it's one of the problems I have with Yoram Mettiger and Caroline Brick, is they have a solution. There is no solution. We're going to have to learn to live with this, and it's not the worst thing in the world. When the United States was founded in 1787, when under the Republic, they had 3 departments only. Department of the Treasury, the Department of State, which had 5 people. Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State. He had 5 clerks. The Department of Treasury had 1,000 because the problem was the absence of taxation. And then Big Henry Knox was the Secretary of War. Why? Because these very smart guys who created the Constitution here understood that having your independence is not the end of it. Once you have your independence, that's when troubles really begin. But now you're going to have to defend your country against outside people. Likewise, Israel. In a way, we're fortunate. It's clear. We have to defend ourselves on a daily basis from these Meshuggahs who are our neighbors. And that's our fate until something radical happens, and it's not the end of the world. That's what it means to have your own independence, is to have an army, have soldiers die and fight from time to time. I don't think there's a solution, and I don't think that Glick and Ettinger are on the right track. Yes, sir.
Going back to your comments on Islam, though.
Yeah.
How do you expect Islam to, quote, reform itself? And when I say reform in the Western,
yeah,
when in fact there has been reformations in Wahhabism and Salafism.
Those are reformations?
Yeah, even worse.
You're making a very good point.
Go back to Muhammad. You've got anti-Semitism.
Yes, but right. You're making a very good point. Is that for the Muslims, a revolution is not like a revolution in the West. A revolution in the West is progress. We're moving to a higher level of social organization. We outgrew monarchy, divine right kings. We moved to constitutional monarchy. Here we used to have a democracy where the president paid attention to the Constitution, things like that. These are people for whom a revolution is a radical regression. It's a retreat. For them, a revolution is going backwards to the first generation of Muslims when everything was pure and everybody was good. That's what they want. You said, my expectations? I have no expectations. I'm not a prophet. I'm saying this will happen when it happens. I don't know when it's going to happen. I have no idea how to make it happen.
But fundamentally, the only way you can, quote, reform Islam into a peaceful entity is by taking out Muhammad. If you take out Muhammad, you don't have Islam.
That's exactly right.
So
I don't know what the solution is. What I do know is what it will look like when we get there, but how to get there, I haven't got a clue.
Sorry? In the
let me move on.
Is the reception to these concepts among Americans really growing, in your opinion?
No. No. We have to live alone. This is our fate. The rabbis teach us that of all the Jews in Egypt, at the time of the Exodus, 80% said, we're not going. I said, okay, you want to die here? You'll die here. 80% of the Jews in Egypt did not leave at the time of the Exodus. They died in the 9th plague. And then they get in, then the survivors go into the desert, and when it comes time to invade Eretz Yisrael, 10 of the 12 scouts say, we don't want to go in there either. We want to stay here. God says, oh, you want to stay here? You'll die here. And over the next 40 years, they died there. We are constantly winnowing. It's a constant sifting process among Jews. And those who remain loyal and stay with the original teaching survive. The others...
Can I bring a point up about the Quran itself, about Muhammad being a Zionist?
Who said this?
Muhammad is a Zionist.
Why is he a Zionist?
Because there's a chapter in the Quran about Banu Israel.
Oh, that's true.
About the Beit being destroyed and the Jews coming back, and it's referring to the Jews.
Yes.
So the Arabs, even Muslims themselves quote that. Former Muslims say the Arabs are living in denial because they suppress that.
Yes.
They have to explain that.
Yes.
So that is
there are a dozen sentences in the Quran which refer to God's gift of land to the Jewish people.
So you see, if you can do that, you can really mess up an Arab.
Yeah, but they don't pay attention.
No, that's what I'm saying. As a Jew, account to them, you can quote from their own book.
Doris is saying, let me give you this last one fresh voice.
I'm only concerned about you.
I'm fine.
Okay, I'm sitting down.
Excuse me. As you're aware, Israel has discovered enormous resources of energy in recent years, and there's prospects of even more. Do you see this change from Israel being energy poor to being self-sufficient and maybe even a big exporter will change anything in the equation you described?
No, I don't see any change. It will do nothing. It will make our lives better. It's a huge headache for the Navy. They've got a big problem in defending these platforms out in the water. We used to joke about how God planted oil under everybody else's land except ours, and now we've discovered we've got a lot of oil. I don't think it's going to change anything. This is a problem with the sons of Ishmael. And that'll be my next book. The Torah has a dozen verses on Ishmael, and when you study these verses, and you study what the great Chazal, the great sages, the way they interpreted them, you see that it's all there. All you need to know about the Arabs you find in the Torah. The character of Ishmael and his mother, it's all there. If you want to know what Ishmael looks like, you can have a good sense by turning on the TV in Israel during the riots. They're all 16 and 17-year-old Vildachayas. They're all wild kids. This is what they call the Arab street. And how old was Ishmael when his father drove him from the tent? 16 or 17, depending upon how you read the text. If you want to know what Ishmael was like, watch these 16 and 17-year-old rock throwers. I've been stoned and almost killed by these people. You see death in their eyes. They want to kill you. Throwing a rock is a lethal weapon. And it's what they call the Arab street. One of the problems is, this takes us back to polygamy. They have too many kids because they have too many wives, and then you get in every Arab country this cohort of teenage boys who should be working, and there's no work for them. And they become the rioters in the streets, and that's why you have to cater to the Arab street, because you're talking about these mobs of violent kids who even have no outlet with women. I mean, it's just a totally dysfunctional society, and it begins with their sexual morality. The sex life of Arabs, the polygamy. Osama bin Laden's father had children with 56 wives. And the story of Ishmael being kicked out of the tent as he's watching his kid baby brother being celebrated, this hostility between sons of two different mothers of one man, it's very common. And when you get lots of wives, they eat each other alive.
Yeah.
It is a dysfunctional community which has become a plague upon mankind. Every time I fly and I got to take off my shoes or whatever, I think of Arafat. He's on the cover of my book. It's the Arabs who are the international hijackers and skyjackers, and they blow planes out of the skies. A plane just went down out of Malaysia. That's who they are. By the way, it's the Barbary pirates all over again. The Barbary pirates were specialists in attacking people in transit on ships when you are most vulnerable. And that's what the Bedouin always did. They attack you when you're crossing the desert, going from point A to point B. They attack planes, they attack airline terminals, trains. It's when people are moving. They've been doing this for thousands of years, yes.
Bennett Zimmerman is here.
I know he is.
And he's going to announce your event at Roberta's house.
Should I do that now?
Do that right now, yeah.
Well, first of all, I've been a fan of Shai Ben-Tekoa's deprogram program for many, many years, and I suggest you find it out, and you'll hear a lot of sense from Bills of Judea. So Shai contacted me about West LA events, and he said, who should I contact in the city about events? And he said he had Doris Wise Montrose, and who else should he do events with? I said, well, there's Doris Wise Montrose. She has events in this town. And I thought the Federation, as you know, has events, but they're so far behind the time.
And they jumped right on it, no doubt.
Yeah, but and then I thought of, I have a friend who runs the American Freedom Alliance, but I thought Doris always gets the better speakers, and I always feel better coming out of Doris events, so once again it was Doris. And then I thought of my friends Roberta and Arnold Side, who on Tuesday would love to have Shai return back to their home. So in the end, it's Friends of the Goal on LA, which is me, Dr. Arnold Side, and a majority contingent from Doris Wise Montrose Children of Holocaust Survivors. You're invited to a private event on Tuesday at 7:30 in Santa Monica, where Shai will speak on the topic of Thomas Jefferson's war with militant Islam, the way it used to be. And as we say, before the Benghazi attack, there was a response on the shores of Tripoli. And so he can speak on current topics and historical topics as the expert that he is. And the only thing I ask is that you, as Doris's contingent of people coming.
Yeah, mention my name.
We'll send out an email to those of you here, but we'll get the RSVPs from Doris. It is a limited seating event, but so that means the Children of Holocaust Survivors is inviting Shai to speak twice, because when you want to do speaking in LA, that's the only way.
Thank you.
So it'll go through your website?
Well, we'll arrange
send a
something.
private email on Tuesday evening, and that will be the second event of Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors this week, which I raised go. That's the way it should be.
I'm ready to continue.
It's entirely up to you. You're the sick.
I'm fine. It's a pleasure to meet with Jews who are as involved in Israel from the right side, pun intended, of the issue. Other questions? Hands? All right, come back. Yeah.
So I would ask, why do you feel so assured that Judea and Samaria will not be? Because I just spoke to my colonel, my colonel relative who said we just need 5% of the border, the other side of the security fence, and then we'll have to go back in like 60 years ago and take it back again. We'll give it away and we'll take it back.
What kind of thinking is that?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Isn't that what they said with Gaza too?
I'm so confident the sheer logistics of it. Who is going to order 350,000 or even 500,000 people, depending on if you count Jerusalem or not? With Jerusalem counted, and all the territories that were annexed to Jerusalem, you're talking about 500,000 Jews. Who's going to drive us out? Who is going to force us to leave our homes behind? We went through this with 10,000 Jews in Gaza, and it was a national nightmare. Who is going to build the new homes and where they're going to be built? And who is going to, and what is going to take the place of the radar installations along that ridge line? You know, a jet plane that takes off from Amman Airport can strike Tel Aviv in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. With a big bomb. We have on that ridge line, Judea and Samaria, these things are, I don't know, it's over 2,000 feet above sea level. God created the Shomron. Shomron in Hebrew could mean little guardian, from the word shomer. And that Jordan Rift Valley is a unique feature on the crust of the face of the earth. There's nothing like it anywhere. It's twice as deep as Death Valley between California and Nevada. It is the greatest anti-tank trap on the planet. There are 5 roads which come up the mountainside from the Jordan River, which makes defense extremely easy. Since the first caveman with a rock in his hand stood on the top of the mountain and the one with a rock in his hand at the bottom of the mountain, they figured out it's better to be on top of the mountain. And so it's easy with those narrow roads to defend that, an invasion from the east. The problem is that it's so impregnable that it's no longer an issue with us. Our problem is, as John Kerry refuses to understand, is that it's not the foreign armies which are going to threaten us. They have already figured out, the Arabs, that they can't fight us man-to-man, tank, plane to plane. We clean their clock every time. They don't need a demilitarized, they don't care if they have a demilitarized state because they can't deal with us on that level. They are a threat to us because they have knives and handguns and fertilizer to make bombs. So you don't want them in the suburbs of Tel Aviv. You know that the Knesset, the building, when it was designed, was positioned in such a way that people said, wait a minute, the entrance to the building is in the distance of small arms fire from Jordan. This was in the 60s, before the Six-Day War. That's how tiny the country is. If you give up Judea and Samaria, any idiot with a homemade Qassam rocket, which they make from aluminum light poles, they cut them down, they cut them up into pieces, stick a few triangular fins on it, and launch the damn thing. You can't have one of those landing on the runways at Tel Aviv, at Ben Gurion Airport. One crummy mortar lands on a runway at Tel Aviv, that can destroy the country. Why? Because we live by the grace of the airlines which service us. There's lots of them now. The moment something like that happens, lands on a runway, does no damage, all the underwriters will say this is a war zone and we're raising your premium by 25%, at which point all of these carriers who come into Israel say goodbye. We're not going to serve you anymore. We can't afford one of these things. So we're not going to give up this land. That's why I'm so confident. Nobody is going to surrender the high ground. Nobody's going to allow these people to come into the outskirts of Ben Gurion Airport. It's just not going to happen. Nobody's that crazy. On top of which, we tried it. That was Oslo. Oslo, everybody was teary-eyed. Oh, the peace has finally come. A question? No? Someone else? Yeah, Rob.
Well, I'm going on the crazy side. There are crazy Israelis. I think this Israeli democracy forum or something. they have an idea of constructive unilateralism, and Martin Sherman talks about it, of unilaterally withdrawing himself. So let the settlers live under the tender mercies of the Palestinians, and then we won't have to compensate them. What do you think about that?
It's all blah blah. It's all blah blah. As the Palestinians and an absence of a state for them is not the issue, no amount of territory that
without agreement, this unilaterally withdrawal. That's
craziness.
You heard that.
It's total craziness. Yes, this is former Ambassador Michael Oren.
Yeah.
If they don't agree to our terms, we're going to retreat. Are you thinking? Is the man thinking when he says something like that? Any other questions? Are you all hungry and want to get a snack?
Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.